We need to talk about the S word. No, not the one referring to excrement. We need to talk about socialism. That one word has become a kind of bogeyman throughout much of the American political landscape. The mere label of socialist is often enough to make many well-meaning Americans automatically reject a policy proposal without any further consideration of its actual content. However, if you ask those same patriots to define the term from which they recoil so readily, many will reveal a shallow understanding at best. It is all too common for American politicians and pundits, especially right-wingers, to exploit such vague popular conceptions, usually in service of goals that are unlikely to benefit the very people they've scared away just by using the word. This is, in no small part, a probable legacy of the Cold War and the accompanying Red Scare, a legacy from which the wealthy donor class seems all too happy to at least tacitly benefit. As a trained linguist, I take what is called a descriptivist stance on semantics, like most modern dictionaries do. Descriptivism holds that word meaning is determined ultimately by popular usage rather than by any particular authority. So I am not here to prescribe which definitions are correct and which are incorrect. However, socialism has become one of those words with multiple related though distinct meanings. This means that clarification is often important for productive discourse, and yet such clarity is seldom provided in American politics. As I see it, there are 6 main senses of the term socialism, and we'll begin with arguably the 2 most academic definitions. The first is any economic system in which laborers collectively own and/or control the means of production or at least have decisive say in business operation. For example, a company bylaw mandating that every worker be given a free allotment of stock shares could be considered leaning socialist in this sense. Principally an approach to economics, socialism becomes a bit more political under the second definition, which is a form of socialism as defined in the first sense implemented at a governmental level via public funding of production apparatus and the distribution of resulting revenue towards public welfare and/or other collective benefits. The shift from the first definition to the second definition may seem like a bigger leap than it actually is. In my opinion, it helps to think of each citizen as a laborer, regardless of actual occupation or socio-economic class, and the welfare state as the means of production. Taxation thus becomes a mechanism by which the laborers buy their respective shares in the means of production, and hence comes the collective ownership that is core to socialism even in its strictest sense. The citizens collectively own the system of public benefits because, in some sense, they've bought it, or rather, continually buy it in a sort of installment or subscription plan. This is probably not a perfect analogy, but it seems close enough that, in my mind at least, it helps in bridging the gap between a principally economic system focused on collective ownership of the means of production and a more politically charged system in which the precise role of government in the economy is a more central question. At least in the first and strictest sense of the term, I've personally come to think of socialism as being to economics what democracy is to politics. It's a bottom-up orientation of authority in a commercial enterprise, much like democracy is a bottom-up orientation of authority in a government. Capitalism, with its typically top-down hierarchies of executives, middle managers, and laborers is more akin to autocracy or even feudalism. Before we proceed with these next 2 usages, a definition of social welfare program may be helpful, so here's my best attempt. A social welfare program is any service or benefit funded collectively by the citizenry so as to be free, or greatly discounted, to each individual citizen. Now, in its third definition, socialism may be used to refer to the creation, expansion, and/or fortification of any social welfare program. For instance, Medicare for All is a socialist proposal according to this usage. In a fourth sense, socialism can also mean any policy or system that primarily or most directly aids lower socioeconomic classes. A new law that favors labor unions would be a clear example. In a fifth sense, socialism may describe systematic and institutional redistribution of wealth and/or resources from higher socioeconomic classes to lower socioeconomic classes. If King Richard the Lionheart had legally implemented Robin Hood's trademark philosophy of taking from the rich to give to the poor, he might have been the first socialist leader in Western history. The most familiar way of doing this in the modern West is through taxation. It is worth noting that definition 5 makes no commitment as to the degree or extent of wealth redistribution. It therefore does not inherently entail taking so much from the rich that their standard of living is no longer meaningfully distinct from that of the middle or working class. Genuine hard work can still be rewarded under a system that reallocates extreme excess. Jeff Bezos, for instance, could give away 90% of his money to various worthy causes and still live a life of luxury and privilege that most of us can only dream of. In fact, the tax rate for the uppermost income bracket in the United States hovered around 90% throughout most of the 1950s and early 1960s, a period in American history well known for its affluence. Clearly, this kind of socialism does not intrinsically inhibit economic prosperity. Last but not least, we have the sixth definition: communism or any similar system, especially marked by overbearing government regulation or even totalitarian control of the economy and often civil property as well. Meanwhile, my own understanding of the word for the longest time, roughly from middle or high school to my late 20s, was a hybrid system that socializes sufficiently fundamental and important needs and desires of the citizenry while privatizing more trivial needs and desires. In other words, it's the kind of government that will pay for your healthcare but not your Xbox. Imagine all human needs and desires arranged in a pyramidal hierarchy, with things like food, water, and shelter at the base and various forms of entertainment or leisure at or near the tip. Personally, I think the stuff at the bottom of such a hierarchy should be socialized and capitalism should be relegated to the top. I've never been certain of where exactly the cutoff should be or if it should even be a binary switch rather than a more gradated system, but healthcare, at least, is easy to place. It belongs firmly in the most socialized stratum, regardless of whether there are 2 levels or 20. It ranks comparably to safety and security, and not even American Republicans seem to mind socialized police and fire brigades. It is through this lens that I often view conservative propaganda as conflating the impulse to provide for the people's most foundational needs with a compulsion to somehow enable everyone to live in unearned opulence. At the suggestion that the government pay everyone's medical bills, right-wing pundits often seem to react as if we've just proposed buying everyone a brand new private jet. Private jets are a privilege that should indeed be earned. Healthcare is a right that one earns just by being human. So for whatever it's worth, that's my own attempt to formally articulate the various usages of the word socialism in American politics and thus lend at least some definitional rigor to a discussion that often sorely needs it. Insofar as popular usage determines validity, I believe all 6 or 7 definitions offered here are legitimate, at least within appropriate contexts. Crucially, however, the versatility of the term does not excuse the semantic bait-and-switch on which so much right-wing rhetoric seems to depend. The word bank may have 2 separate entries in the dictionary, but anyone who tries to deposit money at a riverbed is still mistaken. In a similar way, for instance, Medicare for all is not a harbinger of a Soviet-style, communist, regime. Several other developed nations have had universal healthcare for decades now, and few if any of them have devolved into anything resembling such a dystopia since the implementation thereof. So the next time you hear any American conservative using the word socialism or socialist, I encourage you to ask 3 questions. 1. What does the person mean by the word? If a definition is not overtly given, and it rarely is, do your best to infer one. 2. Look at whatever policy the label is being applied to. Does the label fit as defined? 3. If the definition does fit, does that really change the merits of the policy itself? Is it a bad idea, or a good one? Finally, I'd like to propose a new buzzword for American politics, one that I think will be far more useful and less ambiguous. Plutocracy. At least for our purposes, it may be defined as any political system in which concentrated private wealth facilitates disproportionate and often decisive influence over government. In my view, recent trends towards authoritarianism and even fascism, wrought by Donald Trump and his supporters, overlap and conspire with 2 more long-standing threats to American democracy, neither of which is socialism. The first is theocracy. The second is plutocracy. We don't need another round of McCarthyism. We need a separation of purse and state. Anyway, Thanks for letting me vent. After hearing enough right-wing obfuscation on this topic, I just had to organize my thoughts on it and put them out there for whatever they may be worth in the fight against disingenuous political rhetoric. I'm just some schmuck on YouTube, so I doubt it'll even make a dent, but it can't hurt to try. I welcome any comments, be they positive or constructively critical. Also, I know this video and my last one before a shamefully long hiatus were both more political than what you might have been looking for based on the name and overall intent of this channel, but I hope to post more content on religion, apologetic and counter-apologetic soon. Besides, it's an election year. I think everyone's entitled to dip a bit deeper into politics than usual. Thanks again for watching.